Happy 4th of July, everybody. As I sit here, I feel an angst more pronounced that I felt during the Obama administration and the Tea Party's attack on our country when we attempted to do positive things for the American people. It is then that I wrote a book called As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. And as I feel these feelings, I remember exactly why I did it, and then went and reread some of the pertinent chapters. And you know what? I want to read you something here. I want us to remember who we are, who others see us as, and understand why it is something that we've got to fight for, why this is much worse than under the Tea Party days. I'm not a liberal scholar. I'm not a conservative scholar. What I am is a concerned American citizen that, while always politically aware, did not become engaged until the troubling times that broke my last straw with our country under the tutelage of a corrupt administration that decided to invade a country that had nothing to do with the vicious attack we suffered on September 11, 2001. While I wanted to speak out forcefully during the build up to the invasion, I felt impotent. These were times when anyone who criticized the administration was subject to repercussions overtly and unfortunately, in many instances, covertly. I felt that I was back in Panama during the early days of the government overthrow of Omar Torrijos Herrera, when citizens were scared to say anything critical about the government. Interesting enough, the genesis of what I considered the progressive demise of America began with what many taunt as an era of optimism under President Reagan, as when President Reagan ascended to the throne with rhetoric that, as incoherent as it was, appealed to many, including myself. I had just arrived in Texas to start my education and loved the semblance of a leader that seemed ready to reward those who wanted to get ahead without government or any other obstacle. As I see it, we are at a crossroad. We must decide if we're going to continue our ill fated move, whose outcome is evident in every aspect of our life, from an obscenely disproportionate distribution of wealth to a free trade paradigm that will force a lowering of standards for 95% of Americans as our manufacturing and professional service base continue its migration to foreign slave labor markets. I was born in Panama, Central America. I was always exposed to American history, American government, and American culture, as my father and his father worked most of their lives in an area in Panama called the Canal Zone. This was a strip of land 5 miles wide on either side of the Panama Canal that was governed by the Americans. An interesting fact is that I was born in the same hospital as Senator John McCain, Cocosolo Hospital, of course, with much less pampering. Panamanians worked in certain areas for the Americans were either required or had the option to live in the Canal Zone. Given my father's job as a fireman, we eventually lived there. As such, my first 10 years of schooling was in the Latin American schools in the Canal Zone, where we were educated in both English and Spanish, as opposed to the American schools whose students were taught solely in English, in effect, a transposition of America on foreign soil. While the Latin American schools on the Canal Zone did not have the amenities of the American schools, we had advantages that did not become evident until the schools were integrated during my last 2 years of high school. The Latin American school's basic curriculum required Panamanian geography, civics, and history, American geography, civics, and history, and world geography and history. Moreover, each subject could be taught in either English or Spanish. I still remember having to remember the 9 provinces of Panama and their capital cities. We now have 10 provinces, the 50 states of the United States, and the respective capitals and the capitals of every darn country in the world. Luckily, then we treated the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia each as one country, saving learning 20 plus more capitals. Inasmuch as the standard of living afforded Panamanians living in the Canal Zone was substandard in comparison to that of the Americans, it was higher than most Panamanians. This bought Americans a certain loyalty from Panamanians living in the Canal Zone, as well as a loyalty for those who aspire to get a job on Canal Zone to improve their standard of living. I remember a particular story my father told me that makes this point. My parents lived in Cologne, a city on the Atlantic coast that bordered the Canal Zone. Riots broke out in the city, and my father, working for the Americans, was manning one of the fire trucks to hose down the rioters to prevent them from getting into the Canal Zone. The rioters began threatening the Panamanians working on behalf of the Americans. At that point, many Panamanians working for the fire department convinced the Americans to provide housing, and with that, many benefits afforded the Americans in shopping and other services. From that time, I became cognizant of there being an America. I have only known it to be revered not only by me, but by most people I knew, Panamanian or foreign. This was not a blind reverence. We were all aware of the evils suffered by the Native American slaves, Chinese, and others at the hand of America. We, however, understood that America was atoning, and the reality is no country, ethnicity, or race had a monopoly on the mistreatment of others. America was respected for its power. Moreover, there was great admiration of many of its strong leaders, the President Abraham Lincoln, President Theodore Roosevelt, President Franklin Roosevelt, President John Kennedy, Reverend Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, George Washington Carver, and a few other true American heroes. My maternal grandfather emigrated to the United States in the 1950s. He had not returned to Panama until sometime in the 1970s, when I was really young. To this day, I remember picking up his shoes, looking at the soles, and telling him, "Imagine these shoes walked in the United States." Such were the feelings one had for this land. In 1976, I wrote a song, America, for the bicentennial celebration of America's independence that was performed by the Dynamites, a band I formed with three of my best friends, Roberto Lewis, Alexis Goodrich, and Henry Soley. Our high school participated in the celebrations and had many in the Canal Zone government present for the function. The lyrics started with the familiar lyrics of America the Beautiful chorus and then moved into our celebration of America. It went something like this: America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to sign sea. Then it started: America, happy birthday to you. We are proud to know your 200 years. We know that you see you're the land of the free, a land we all love from sea to shining sea. Oh, America, you know we really love America. It's the nation of the free. Oh, America, it is the nation we all love. Your United States, we all contemplate a life we all love, a life we dream of. That's the kind of reverence folks all over the world had for the country. It is important that as Americans, we realize that contrary to the narrative we hear mostly on the right, radio and television stations, the America most of the world knew in the 20th century post World War II was not an America that foreigners hated because of their freedom. In fact, America was the country most revered. America was the country most wanted to emulate. America was the country that made things happen. America was skyscrapers, NASA, Skylab, Grand Canyon, Motown, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, A Horn of Plenty, Hollywood, New York, Ford, Buick, Plymouth. America made things. America innovated. The best from the rest of the world did what it took to get here, not to become filthy rich, but because America had the resources, the vision, the character that allowed anyone to make it with their work. America was and is a country in which the sum of its parts, unlike any other country in the world, is what made it strong. With all of its faults, it is that synergy, the composite mental power and diversity from peoples from all over the world that has given it all the resources that made it great. It is the marginalization of the vast majority of these resources that will dictate its demise if left to the misguided efforts of the right wing. And this struggle has been going on for a very long time. And I tell you one thing specifically: all of those who have immigrated to this country and became American citizens will not allow those who haven't a clue in what America had transitioned itself to be, to ever get a foothold and take over and make this country all that it was never designed to be. So, folks, it's 4th of July as I talk today. Many folks are concerned. Many folks are scared. Many folks are concerned that MAGA will be taking over our beautiful country. Many are scared that we're going to get King Trump. Well, starting from the immigrants that are over here and the well positioned natively born Americans after 1776 and beyond. It won't happen. And you know why? Because we have faith. We've gone through the Red Revolution. We've gone through so much over the years and we've overcome. And it's on you, it's on me, it's on all of us to make sure that we continue on the path we've been on. As I see it, class warfare the only resort to right-wing doom. And that class warfare means the class who loves America, the class who continues to build America against those who would ensure not its demise, but its descendancy into indentured servitude for the rest of us as just a few flourish. We won't let it happen. Today, we are honored to have a special guest, someone that has been with us before under a different title. We have Jerry Ashton, founder of End Veteran Debt, a 501c3 private charitable foundation. He's going to be with us. He's a former Navy veteran. Jerry was also co-founder of RIP, Rest in Peace Medical Debt. That was also a 501c3 that cleared over $12 billion in debt, in medical debt. So this guy knows what he's doing. So again, welcome my brother from another mother. Good day to you, Mr. Jerry Ashton. How are you doing today?
I'm just lucky, Egberto. And I can't roll my R's, so don't ask me to do that.
Well, I mean, I think you made a good attempt at that and you did a good job. But anyway, look, I don't know if you are ever going to say, I'm going to settle down. It seems like you're always moving forward. You're always doing something. You're always helping folks out. That seemed to be your nature. Tell me a little bit about your new project. And I don't know how new it is, but End Veteran Debt. We are in a society where we ask a lot of people to sacrifice. They sacrifice to keep our country one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful country in the world. Yet, when it's time to take care of the ones who pretty much ensure our safety, etc., we're not too kind with them. Why don't you tell me about your new project?
Well, thank you for asking, and thank you, audience, for listening to this magnificent podcaster and fellow human being, Egberto Willis. Yes, there is something new and bigger. What happened with RIP Medical Debt, if you remember, I and a friend by the name of Craig Antico wandered into Occupy Wall Street back in 2011 and became intrigued with the messages we heard there. We were a couple of former debt collectors ourselves. And when we listened to the complaints, all the wrongs that need to be righted, there was one that we were particularly suited to do something about, and that was medical debt. We know how to collect medical debt. We just didn't realize what a scourge it was and the harm it was doing to America. So we decided to switch gears, re-engineer ourselves, and begin the process of eliminating medical debt. And it was just a wild idea 10 years ago. Not much of a chance for success. Nobody talked about medical debt back in 2014, but today you can't open a newspaper without reading about it. And that's because of what we started, just because we were touched. Just like I'm hoping that your listener and viewer will be touched by the story I'm going to tell you about veterans. Yeah, we walked into Occupy Wall Street as debt collectors, walked out as debt forgivers. Now I'm going to switch gears and pay attention to veterans, because veterans, even though there are about 18 million veterans in America, that comprises 6% of our population. Guess what? They account for twice as many people who are homeless, twice as many people who commit suicide, twice as many people who are in various forms of financial and societal dangers. So let me ask you this: does the date June 6th mean anything to you or your listeners?
I think you should enlighten us, but I think it has something to do with the Second World War, correct?
I believe it does. June 6th, 1944.
D-Day?
D-Day. D-Day. That's when the Americans and their allies stormed the beaches at Normandy in order to liberate Europe. When that job was completed and they began coming home in 1945, they were greeted like heroes. Today, not so much. Our veterans who are returning today face a much different America. So I'm not going into the seemingly endless statistics of how they're affected. But we're here to change that. We're going to change the story, just like we changed the story on medical debt. So we're taking June 6th seriously, and we launched Operation Debt Day. It's no longer D-Day, it's Debt Day. And between June 6th, 2024, going forward to June 5, 2025, we are going to set about to raise enough money to abolish $80 million worth of veteran debt.
Did you say 80 billion as in a B?
Yeah, and million as in M.
Oh, okay, okay. That's what I hoped you had said.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
And by the way, it's not just medical debt. We're taking a look at any debt that encumbers or harms a veteran. You're talking about predatory debt, like payday loans, car title notes, scam educational systems, schools. We're talking about debt of necessity, like putting tires on the car so you can get to work. We're going to locate that debt and we're going to get rid of it. That's our job.
Now, let me ask you this. Are you going to be doing this on an individual per person basis, or you're going to try to aggregate this into, let's say, people from one particular debt collection agency has all the data for this group of folk? Or is this going to be people put in requests to your company, your 501c3, or how's that going to work?
Now, let me explain how debt buying occurs. First of all, very few people know that their debt, medical debt, payday loan, credit cards, when they are defaulted on and the creditor can't get their money, they'll sell that debt to a debt buyer on the open market for pennies on the dollar. When they have that debt in their possession, they then either begin the collection process or they sell it out to other collection agencies who then pursue you and me for the full amount. That's as bottom feeding as you can get. So what we do is we're going to go to the same debt market, but instead of concentrating on medical debt, we're going to concentrate on that debt of necessity and predatory debt, and we're going to compete with the collection agencies and we're going to buy it. And once it's in our control, then we're going to forgive it. Now, by the way, I teamed up again with Craig Antico, going back in time and pushing it forward. He has a company called ForgiveCo, which is a public benefit corporation that he started in order to approach the problem of debt in particular. So he and I got together and I said, Craig, let's you and me work just on veteran debt. Do debt of other kinds with other people, but let's take care of veterans. And he is now partnering with me, he and his son, Eric Antico. So we're pretty happy about that. So what does that mean to somebody who's listening? No, you can't write to me and ask me to forgive your debt. But I will want you to write to me because I'm going to connect you with local charities that can. You see, work as a foundation as opposed to a charity. When we bring money in, we can put that money out to individual charities that work with us, or we can just do the work ourselves. But this is a national and local approach, thinking globally, but acting locally. So we're partnering with 80 different organizations, veteran, civilian, anybody that has a care about veterans. And each one of them, we're going to co-fundraise so that in their area, which is getting to your point, in their home state, we're going to have them with us raise enough money and by the way, that's $50,000, to buy $1 million worth of veteran debt and then forgive it, sending letters from us to the people whose debt has been forgiven and say, guess what? You'll never hear from a bill collector again. And by the way, before I forget, endveterandebt.org. That's where you got to go to help us.
And veteran are plural or singular?
Singular,
Veteran
and veteran, and debt is DEBT,
and
endveterandebt.org.
I will have that in the blog post accompanying this podcast. And by the way, this will be aired on KPFT 90.1 FM Houston and likely throughout the entire Pacifica network. Now, here is the question. Uh, Now, this is a service that there are two things that I think you need. One of is the people that need help and the people who are willing to help your organization buy the debt at pennies on the dollar so that it can actually be forgiven. Because as you get income in, you're buying that debt not to go after somebody, but you're buying that debt to forgive it. And now, are people specifically going to let me, I guess I better ask it this way. You're going to randomly buy debt, and for the people who are forgiven, send them out a letter. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so there are two people I'm reaching out to by way of your show. Number one, the veteran who needs that help because we want to know about it. We want to see what we can do for you locally. And number two, any organization, faith-based community, business, if you want to partner with us so we can co-fundraise to take care of that debt, we'd love to have you to be one of 80 organizations, as each of the 80 organizations will abolish $1 million for the medical debt, symbolically $1 million for each year that has passed since June 6, 1944, where 4,000 Americans and allies lost their lives on just that one day.
That is exceptional. And how is it working thus far?
Well, you're talking to the Jerry Ashton of 10 years ago. We're just starting this.
Right.
But I do have a track record and I have a great team working with me and already people who are lining up to partner. And I want to point out another interesting thing. I'm using my background as a former Navy journalist to put together a media room so that when we're doing the work that we're doing, we're going to get stories down about how we're helping people in Austin or Dallas or Washington, D.C. or the Northwest. So we're going to have local stories written because we want people who are doing good to be known. And we believe in impact awareness. And what greater impact is there than to be able to help your fellow man and woman who are veterans who signed a blank check one time that said, I'm willing for America to cash this check up to and including my life. And when they come home, they can't even get that. They can't get anything in the way of a check cash except a payday loan. So that's just too wrong.
Now, there's another aspect to this, and I'm not sure exactly how it works. I think in reading some of your literature, I think one of the services you're actually attempting, I don't know if you're attempting to offer or what, is that after this debt is forgiven, that the person's credit history is cleared or made whole. Is that a part of it as well?
Would you restate that?
Yeah, in other words, one thing is paying a debt off, but then
Yeah.
there's a history of that debt in the person's credit record. Are
No,
you also doing anything about that?
yes, we're making sure that in the cases where we find a debt mark, that we're going to be taking that off. But here's another important thing: education. We want to educate at our site, endveterandebt.org. We're going to have an educational system by way of making sure that veterans don't get caught in the trap. Financial literacy.
Financial literacy, right?
Yes, very important. So what we're doing is number one, we're making people aware, and we know that there's some people who say, you know what, that's wrong, and that needs to be righted. So they're touched. And when somebody's aware and touched, they want to know more. What's this all about? Is this a scam? People actually ask me about that when I started RIP Medical Debt. How can you make any money? You don't make any money. That's why it's called a charity. So they want to get educated. How can veterans defend themselves from these bottom feeders, the people that will take advantage of them? And if they do they have an ally, groups of people who know what they're talking about, subject matter experts who will step up and say, you need to do this and this and this. Now, there are a lot of local organizations, and particularly the DAV, that does a great job of working with veterans. Lots, if you Google veteran charities, you'll see them by the thousands. My question would be, why should there be a charity to begin with? You know, if anything, our organization would like to work ourselves out of business. We'd like to imagine a world in which veterans are considered a test case of how to run things right. I'm talking about everything from the VA, which does some things absolutely wonderful, and in other cases, they have actually harmed the veteran that they're working with. People need to understand that. They need to change that. And the only way that things change in the powers that be is that if enough citizens get, shall we say, annoyed, is that strong enough for you?
I think actually annoyed and engaged.
And exactly right, exactly. And do something about it. At the simplest end of it, make a donation. We'll put it to good use. The second way is to become what we call a plank owner. Are you familiar with that term, Egberto?
No, I'm not.
In naval lore, that meant any enlisted person or officer who came on board a ship while it was being commissioned would be called plank owners. It was an honorarium. To become a plank owner with us, $500. But think of the fact what that $500 will do, multiplied by, well,
Several thousand.
every nickel is $1. So
Right,
imagine
right.
$1 worth. So if you will do that, that will be great. And of course, we're looking for people who want to work with us in Operation Debt Day, so that someday we'll have an Operation Undebt Day.
That we can all live toward that operation on that day. Well, my dear friend Jerry, tell me something that I should have asked you that I didn't.
I think you've done a great job. I guess I would like to bring up the fact that money is not the root of all evil. Debt is the root of all evil. And when we allow people to slip into debt and then not give them a helping hand, have you ever heard of the term social determinants?
Oh yeah, yes,
Social determinant is anything upstream from an incident or an accident that contributed to that incident or that
right.
accident. For example, if you're living in a food desert, or if you're living in a transportation desert, that will affect your health. It'll affect your ability to get to a job. Are you aware of the fact that debt itself is a social determinant of suicide?
Yes, yes.
We want to get rid of two things: their debt, and eliminate and reduce the amount of suicide.
If you get rid of the thing that determines further action, then you solve the problem of further whatever would have come from that said bad action. Excellent. Well, look, Jerry, it's always been a pleasure speaking to you. I have a whole lot of respect for the work that you do. Thank you for the work that you do, and please keep doing the work that you do. It is invaluable, and I'm sure just like you got a whole lot of folks out of debt with the RIP medical debt, you will also with End Veteran Debt. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you, and thank your listeners for learning more about this wrong that needs to be righted.
Today, I'm honored to have a special person, the unconventional journalist, Sam Oser. As you guys know, I am very, very specific about having independent journalism taking over the sphere in this country. As we know, corporate journalism simply doesn't cover the things that need to be covered. Why? Because it's not in their interest. But anyway, with us, again, Sam Oser, welcome to Politics Done Right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Egberto.
Well, look, let me tell you, when I heard from you and heard that you were embarking on a new project with regards to empowering the community or letting the community know that they are empowered to do what I kind of refer to as citizens journalism. Why don't you tell me a little bit about some of the plans that you, along with other organizations, are talking about?
Right, for sure. Thanks again for having me on. So I've been doing journalism now as my activism for about 6, 7 years. And it's getting to the point where I've realized like it's time to teach people how to report in their own communities. And the reason being is because, the news is not reflecting what community wants or needs to see. And people in their own community, they know when their streets flood. They know when they're working or trying to deal with Houston City Council to bring attention to the flooding. They know what's going on. So this effort, it's a workshop, and I'll be doing it with the Climate Justice Museum at the Post. And this workshop is just to help people tell their own stories. Like we have everything we need to tell our own stories. We have so many free tools. Like you and I, we engage in a lot of digital things online, and it's accessible to everybody. So people in their own community should really start stepping up and reporting on what's happening in their communities, I think.
Now, Sam, one of the reasons you sent me a narrative here, some points that I'd like you to articulate on. Why is it that individual citizens now have to do this? There are reasons. What are the reasons?
Yeah, so reason number one is news deserts and news layoffs. So in January 2024 alone, there were over 500 layoffs in the journalism industry. There are currently, what did I say? It was like 65,000 journalists in the nation. And that sounds like a lot, but that's one journalist for every 5,000 people. Um, and so that's, one person for a city, basically. And the news deserts are becoming more and more of a thing as news layoffs happen. I encourage anybody listening, please Google news deserts, and you will see that a lot of the South, the southern part of the US, Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, parts of Texas, Mississippi, it's a news desert. There's a news desert an hour away from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the capital of our country. And about an hour or so away from the capital, there's a county that does not have adequate access to news. So these are some of the disparities that we're seeing. And people who are journalists, they're going to go where there are jobs. They're going to go to where there is money, right? So a person went to school, they studied journalism, they need to put a roof over their head, they need to put food on their plate. If they want to be in the journalism, where are they going to go? They're going to go to states that have news publications that can pay their mortgage, their rent, pay for food. They're not going to go to the South where there aren't a lot of news opportunities. So that's one reason.
You know what is interesting before you finish there, Sam?
Yeah.
Because as you know, I put everything through a politics frame or prism, if you will. And when you said that, all I could think about, you just named Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Texas, right an hour outside of Washington, D.C. And all I could think of is that those are the people nobody listens to or anybody knows about. And
Exactly.
henceforth, it creates a vacuum where political interests can go into and mislead these people into doing things that vote against their own interests. So as you were telling me about this, uh, these news deserts, I just pulled up the map from your link tree, and folks, everybody should visit linktree.ee/unconventional journalist. That is Sam's linktr.ee at, all right, let's back up. It's linktr.ee/unconventional journalist. And put that into your thing if you get a chance. She does a whole lot of good work. And I ran across this article at her link tree, which comes from the Hussman School of Journalism and Media from the University of North Carolina, that shows these news deserts. And when you said that, Sam, a bell just went off. Oh my God, that is why so much of our population is actually so ill-informed.
Right.
Because again, who fills that vacuum? And you are telling people, or I think what you're saying, and tell me if I'm correct, your workshop will actually help citizens fill that gap that otherwise would go filled with who knows what.
Exactly. No, that's exactly it. And what's really interesting about the news desert map, so in the workshop too, I have a news desert map with a food desert
Mhm.
map and also a gerrymandering map. So the states and the counties and the people that are experiencing lack of food access and active gerrymandering are the same people who don't have quality access to news. Isn't
Wow.
that crazy?
It's what a correlation, right?
Yeah, if you overlay these maps on top of each other, you see that like they are actively experiencing the brunt of systemic oppression. And there's nobody there to report on it.
There you go. And that's why so many can be fooled into believe some of these oppressions aren't in fact systemic.
Exactly.
You know, so tell me a little bit more about what you intend to do. First of all, tell us how people can find out about going to this workshop to make themselves good citizen journalists.
For sure. So I haven't posted on my social media yet, but if you follow me at Sam the Mullet, I will post the little graphic. It'll be at the Post in July. I have 2 workshops coming up for sure. My goal is to make it monthly to try to make it as accessible as possible. But for now, it's July 14th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the Post in downtown Houston. And then the second one is August 11th, also from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. So that's July 14th and August 11th.
And you'll have all of that on your Twitter at Sam the Mullet, right?
Yes, at Sam the Mullet. Yes.
Yeah, because I think let me tell you, hearing about this excites me because I constantly talk about us having to take care of ourselves. We're the ones who are going to have to save ourselves. We can't expect these corporations who own these entities to come out there and fill the void. And what you're doing, I think, is invaluable to ensure that people know that they, first of all, they have agency in this and that they can make a difference. So why don't you talk to them, let them know
Yeah.
what needs to be
Well,
done.
and like the thing is too, is, we live in Houston, Harris County. I'm not sure where your audience is, but I'm sure it's around here. And I'm sure some of y'all may be thinking like, well, we have the Houston Chronicle, we have Houston Public Media, we just now got Houston Landing, we have Community Impact, we have all these various sources. But when you look at the news that's given to you, does it truly reflect what you're experiencing? First of all, I want you to ask yourself that. And then secondly, a lot of these news entities, KPRC, KHOU as well, they are driven by profit, not driven by community or community representation. Even though the Houston Landing is technically a nonprofit, they still have a board of very, very rich people, and they have to answer to how much money is coming in. And so this continuous putting profit over people, and we see this many times in our prison systems, in our healthcare, in our education, HISD state takeover, but we see it in our media as well. And so that's part of why it's important to report about what's happening in your community. And it can be real simple. I've been talking to some people about this because it's been I'm on 2 years of like, okay, I'm going to do this workshop, finally launching it. I've been thinking and talking about it for 2 years and getting feedback from people. And one of the main things that kind of puts people at a pause is they're like, I'm not articulate, I'm not educated, I'm not a journalist. And the thing I have to say to that, and this is part of the workshop that I give, is that Western media as we know it was created by a bunch of white guys in the 1920s. I'm serious. There's this book called The Untold Story of Objectivity.
Mhm.
It's by Lewis Raven Wallace. Lewis Raven Wallace was a corporate journalist, and he quit. And he's now part of Press On, which is a Southern journalism movement, journalism in service of liberation. He's now part of that group, and he does journalism in service of liberation now. No, it's called Undoing the Myth of Objectivity. And in his book, he researches, where did objectivity even come from?
Mhm.
And prior to the 1900s, news was given out by different political parties. So you had socialists, they had their newspaper, the capitalists had their newspaper, the communists had their newspaper. All these different political groups had their newspaper. When we get into the 1920s and 30s, what happens? The Great Depression. People are trying to get money. So news went away from all these partisan news outlets to something being more centralized and in favor of advertising. That's when advertising models were introduced into the news media, because they were like, well, it's the Great Depression. I need to make money. So how can I make money based off the news? And they started putting ads more heavily in their papers than they did in the past. And neutrality came about because they were trying to be neutral as to not piss off their advertisers. Um, and the thing is too, like, these white guys who created this form of journalism in the 1920s and 30s, we have to keep in mind that they were probably racist, probably transphobic, homophobic. If they were stewards of newspapers in the South, they were probably in the Klan, to be honest. And so this is what kind of seeded our current form of Western media. And again, Lewis Raven Wallace, Undoing the Myth of Objectivity, he did a bunch of research and he writes it all down about the history and where we are now. And so if you feel like you're not articulate, you feel like you don't have the journalism chops, whatever, please just be reminded that Western media as we know it was created like 100 or so years ago, and it does not accommodate the current needs of our communities because it was never made for us.
I think that is so essential what you just said with respect to, and even the title of the book is insightful, objectivity. What is in fact objectivity? Because when you talk about certain neighborhoods and whatever rags we have in Houston or elsewhere, how much of the community do they really cover? How often do they go to the civic clubs, or how often are they on the streets of these communities, or simply dependent on what their view is of community instead of what community view is of that community? So who's better to tell that story than those who partake of it? And if you have a workshop that is able to tell folks how to bring their reality. And I think that's why social media has taken off so well, because
Yeah.
it gives us the ability to see how just about everybody who has the chops to just go out there and say, I'm willing to put my life out there. I'm willing to put our activity out there, an activity that wouldn't have gotten covered before. I tell you, Sam, I get so many stories off of TikTok or
Yeah.
Instagram, and I put it out there. I've contacted so many lawyers and some rappers, different folks. I've just going through my TikTok and I said, oh wow, I didn't know that. Let me contact this person and learn more about it and put that on. Write an article about it. Sometimes put it on the radio. Sometimes put it on video. I mean, it's just. I think this is needed, and I think giving folks that structure, giving folks that ability to learn some of your journalistic skills and how to apply that to their yeoman's, whatever it is that they're doing, I think that is where we need to go, because we can see right now that corporate journalism just ain't going to cut it.
Yeah, and the thing is too, is like journalists, they're going to go where their job is. They're going to go where
Mm-hmm.
their money is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a journalist coming into Houston and they're from up north because they couldn't find a job up there in journalism and they found a job at the Houston Chronicle, where are they going to live? Most of the journalists I know that have moved from out of state live in the most gentrified areas of Houston.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
They're not in touch with the day to day.
Mm-hmm.
of the community because they're truly not part of it. And it's not their fault, right? Like a lot of people come in with good intentions and they're trying, but sometimes if you're moving too fast, how can you be boots on the ground in a community you're not even part of?
Exactly.
Um, so like there's that layer of it. And oh, there was another part. But that was like the main thing I wanted to say because
Right.
like you're in your community, you know what's there. And we
Right.
have all these different tools. And oh, yes, I wanted to say like also my workshop, like it does cover some basic elements of journalism, right? You can report on your community, but you can't say things that are false.
Right.
Right. Make sure you fact check yourself. It's like when you're arguing with your spouse or arguing with whoever, you know, you want to make sure your facts are straight. And that goes for journalism in general, whether or not it's citizen journalism or whatever. So even though Western journalism as we know it was created in the 1900s out of the Great Depression, fact checking is still valid.
Right.
So I'm not saying like throw everything out the door, just throw your insecurities about not measuring up out the door.
Right. Well, look, let me tell you, Sam, give me a closer. Give our audience, first of all, tell us a little bit more about your workshop. How can they get in touch with you? And give me a good closer.
Alrighty, so the workshop I've been doing on and off for about a year or so. And I finally have come to a head with it. And the Climate Justice Museum has agreed to let me do this workshop in their space. They currently have their space at the Post in downtown Houston. The Post is the new fancy post office with all the restaurants. And so, in tandem with the Climate Justice Museum, I'm going to be putting on this workshop in this space. Right now, it's all physical. I'm not having any online ones because I'm really just trying to tap into who's here, who's around me. But if it is something of interest for it to be online, if you message me at Sam the Mullet, whenever you follow me, if I gauge that there's enough interest for online workshops, we can definitely go that route. But for now, the two workshops I have planned is July 14th from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Post and August from 2 to 4 p.m. also at the Post in the Climate Justice Museum space. And we're going to be covering a couple of things. We're going to be covering what is community journalism, why is it important, the basics of journalism, and then at the end, we're going to brainstorm story ideas so that way you can leave with ideas on what to write on going forward.
You have been listening to the unconventional journalist, Sam Oser. Sam, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. This is definitely something that we need. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Manuel Pastor. Manuel Pastor is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity at the University of Southern California. He currently directs the Equity Research Institute at USC. Pastor holds an economics PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and is the inaugural holder of the Turpingian Chair in Civil Society and Social Change at USC. Senor Manuel Pastor, welcome to Politics Done Right.
Gracias, siempre un placer estar otra vez contigo.
Sí,
And
senor.
fantastic that you speak not just Spanish, but you got the Armenian name right, Turpangian.
Oh, I am glad I did that.
It's great that you've got the Spanish right, but you also got the Armenian right. Turpangian is the name of the person who endowed the chair that I've got.
Well, good. I'm glad that I did that right. Anyway, Senor Pastor or Professor Pastor, let me tell you that as you know, right now in our space, Trump is claiming that there are a whole lot of Latinos that are starting to migrate to his side of the aisle, his form of thinking. And as much as many of us think it is crazy that somebody as racist, sexist, and xenophobic could possibly garner the support of Latinos. But yesterday, I was speaking to an undocumented worker, and we were talking about both the sentiment of undocumented workers as well as the sentiment of some immigrants coming in over the border in current times, as well as naturalized and what we call inmigrantes con papeles, immigrants with papers. And I tell you what, Trump may be onto something, and I wanted to hear from the expert how true and how widespread it is. But what he told me was that yes, there are a lot of Latinos gravitating to Trump, and even he, as an undocumented worker, have a feeling for Trump because all those current undocumented workers are coming over here and they are getting their papers and they're getting support and housing and they're getting all these things that I work hard every day for. And they come here and get it all for free. Please tell me about the dynamics.
So there's a lot going on with that, and that is something that the thing you specifically mentioned, and I'll move to the bigger picture, that a lot of folks don't realize. Undocumented people in the country who got here 5 years ago were not able, like the current wave of people that are coming in, to ask for asylum for the most part and then be able to get some benefits and assistance. And it's interesting to watch these older undocumented folks, 5, 10 years, 15 years in the country, beginning to sound a little bit like right-wing Republicans, resentful of the newcomers who've got all this access, but it's something that's really going on. And what is actually also going on is that there is a shift within the Latino population. You know, it was easy to say at first in 2020 that it was really only Texas Latinos on the borderlands, a lot of people who might be in Border Patrol, Cubans in Florida who were falling susceptible to Trump. But a closer look at that data showed that there were actually more Latinos in other parts of the country that moved toward the Republican Party even in 2020. And the phenomena is continuing to occur. It's not overwhelming, but it's significant enough that it could definitely cost Biden the election in November. So the real question is, why is it going on? A couple of different dynamics. First, there's a big gender divide. If you look at both in the Black population and the Latino population, who's moving over is men,
Males.
not women. So I think that there's one aspect of the Trump appeal that is very macho. And I don't mean that in a purely Latino way. If you look at the white population, his appeal to men is far outpacing his appeal to women. He's just callous, cruel, and brutal. And that has an appeal to someone who's got a macho idea of what does it mean to be a man. And that's what he's counting on. And that is shifting some Latino men and Black men into those columns. I think the other thing is economic conditions. That is, that there's a perception about the economy having been better under Trump. That perception statistically is incorrect. This is the lowest level of unemployment we've had since the 1960s. It's the lowest level of Black and Latino employment, close to when it's ever been recorded. And we're seeing the inflation rate come down. But I think there's a lot of hurt from the era of the pandemic. And there's also just a lot of sticker shock from the higher prices we're facing, even though the inflation rate has come down. I think the last thing is that there's a lot of Latinos who are actually pretty much law and order. And so as progressives in the Democratic Party have moved in a direction which probably many of us support, of reducing the carceral state, of being more forgiving of people who've engaged in petty crime, that there's a lot of working class Latinos who feel like, my car got broken into. Why aren't we arresting the person for doing that? Why is that happening in my community? And Trump is speaking to that in a way that Democrats are not.
And it's ironic because I think you've nailed all of those, and it seems to me like the answer, most of the answer is, believe it or not, well, you know that education, meaning exposing them to the truth, but the other is also catering the message in such a manner that you just spoke about a kid breaking into a car, right? One of the things that progressives believe in is, yes, that kid breaking into a car should be penalized somehow, but it shouldn't make sure that their lives going forward it makes them a pariah for the rest of their lives, right? We know that that has something to do with the with the increase in crime. So whereas Republicans look at things that we are going to try to solve this problem today by the hook or the crook, but don't expand on that solution. There are other ways. We're not expressing that as I see it to these communities. My question to you is
I
how
would, I would say to that what has happened is that progressives are increasingly speaking to the already woke instead of
right,
trying to figure out how to awaken and animate and tap into this population. And I think the thing to realize, Latinos are overwhelmingly working class. There's a thin group of people who are elite in the Latino community or professional middle class. Even people who are really poor in the Latino community generally are working, particularly undocumented folks, because they don't have any access to some of the social safety net that's there. So it's a very working class community. And so speaking to the working class about working class issues, housing, our economy, inflation, how to get a job, how to feel safe in your communities, that's something that, yeah. And by the way, how to speak, and we just have for the last few minutes, without using complicated multisyllabic words that you need to have gone to college to understand. Um, that's how we're going to make this kind of an appeal.
you know what? It's amazing. I spoke to the undocumented worker that I was telling you about completely in Spanish, and I had some problems with some of the wordiology exactly because my Spanish is I left Panama at 18, so my Spanish is very simple, not the complicated language that one would get in college with the bigger words. I didn't do a lot of newspaper reading on economics in Panama as an 18-year-old. But so I could relate to him, and one of the things he said after I explained certain things, he said, "You have to remember something. You are educated. Most of us are not." And that's what he said to me yesterday, and it kind of put it back, and it even as it reflected what I've said, that we have to go to where the people are, and not where we think they should be.
Yes.
And he accepted that, but he also said, but also the message, you have to remember that they're not going to try to study what you're studying. They just want to know what's going to help me now.
Yeah, and I think the point is that the education goes both ways. He is right to look at you and say you are more formally educated than than him. And he educated you yesterday on what
Yes.
people are really feeling. And I think when we have that level of respect for these voters, that's more possible for us to bring them on board. But I think the first thing to do with this, Egberto, is to not look at these voters and say, oh gosh, what is wrong with them? But to really ask the question, what is wrong with us that we're not communicating sufficiently so that a xenophobic, uh, sexist, uh, dangerous, convicted felon like Donald Trump has such appeal. And that means we need to challenge the sexism that exists in our community. That means that his macho appeal has some appeal. It means that we need to do all that. We need to listen hard to and understand that this is a real phenomenon.
And you know what? I want to end it with those exact words, because that is exactly what we need to do. Dr. Manuel Pastor, distinguished professor, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Love to be with you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please.